Hello everyone. So this is endocrine system. We're gonna go and talk about chapter 19. So hormones. Anything dealing with hormones is going to fall in this category, the endocrine system. So the endocrinologist, they even though so they might even treat things like diabetes that has to do with hormones. But diabetes is one of those that's so common now, you don't have to go to an endocrinologist for that. Um, it's being treated by even the, non-specialist people. So, in the sense that parts of your body need to talk to other parts of your body. One way of doing that is by neurons, and the other way of doing that is through releasing these chemicals or hormones. So, what is the endocrine system? It's all about, um, you see over here, there's a cell that's secreting something, and then it's getting in the blood vessel, and then it's gonna go to the target cell, and target cell receives that chemical, and it's going to react according to what's received. So it's collection of specialized cells and tissues that secrete hormones. So this chemical, whatever is being secreted, it's going to circulate through your entire body. An example of this would be maybe insulin. Some other examples are glucagon, adrenaline. All of these hormones circulate through your body. And when they reach the target cell, whatever that is, either to be your liver, your muscles, then you have receptors there. They'll activate. So the chemical activates the target cell, and then different reactions take place. So you have different types of glands in your body that secrete these different types of hormones. So even though it's going through the whole body, it's in your blood. Only target cells are reacting to it because they're the only ones that have receptors for it. Okay, so this is figure 19.1. So they went ahead and highlighted major glands that we're going to focus on. So for example, in your brain, we have a structure called hypothalamus. Hopefully you already know this by now. And underneath that we have thalamus, and beneath the hypothalamus, you have other gland called pituitary gland, and also known as hypophyseal gland. And then down here next, you have your thyroid gland, thyroid cartilage, and above your kidneys, you have these triangular shaped glands known as suprarenal glands or adrenal glands. There are two names for them. Adrenal glands is the old name. So we're going to call them suprarenal glands because renal stands for kidney. Supra means above. They sit above the kidneys. And behind your stomach, you got most fatty-like tissue, and that's going to be called the pancreas. So that's the pancreas there. And this will also create your insulin and glucagon, which is responsible for regulating your blood sugar. And then this is basically showing the ovary here. Okay, so over here on the other side, if you take the thyroid gland, you flip it up, it'll look, and then you look back, you have the parathyroid is on the posterior surface of your thyroid gland. And then you got your parathyroid gland, that's going to be responsible for your calcium uptake. And above your heart, you have your thymus gland. Thymus, that's the heart, and it's above the heart. And that's going to be responsible for part of your immune system response, some of them which we're going to skip. So for example, let's see, digestive tract. We're going to skip that one. By the way, the adipose tissue releases releases chemicals known as leptin and resistant that is going to make you hungry. So these can make you super, super hungry. And especially if you're fasting and you start eating something, they're going to start releasing these chemicals. They make you very, very hungry. And then your reproductive organs, you can make your testosterone and the estrogen and so forth. So let's take a look at the endocrine glands. If you break this term down, crine, the word crine means gland. And the word endo, you probably already know, but that means inside or within. I'm just gonna say inside here. Okay, so we'll say that these glands over here are the endocrine glands. It's a gland that's going to secrete chemicals to the inside of the body. So what is the inside of the body? Well, inside of the body refers to anything that's not in communication with the outside world. So that means there's not going to be any bacteria there. There's not going to be any air there. It's going to be sterile environment. For example, inside your body, you have things like your blood. I'm just gonna say blood, lymph, and your organs and muscle. So that's something that's sterile. That's not in contact with the outside world. Most of the stuff is not going to have any bacteria. So and so you have those endocrine glands. They're on the inside. Then you have the exocrine glands. And this is spelled wrong. It should be CRINE. And so these exocrine glands, they are found on, let's say this one is showing the one on the skin. Maybe this is secreting sweat or sebum. So these are going to be on the outer surface. And these are not going to be on the inside. So inside the body is going to secrete into your blood, into your lymph, and it's going to your muscles and organs and so forth. But the exocrine gland is that's going to secrete things outside. So for example, that would be your skin. The exocrine gland is going to be your sweat gland, and it's going to be your oil glands and sebaceous glands or merocrine glands. So those are going to secrete substance to the outside of the body, which is going to be on the skin. In addition, exocrine glands would be your digestive system. So for example, in your stomach, your intestines, you have exocrine glands that make acid. So it'll make these enzymes that'll digest your food. So if you're wondering what the digestive system is inside the body, why is that considered to be exocrine? Well, yeah, digestive system is actually in communication with the outside world. You have lots of bacteria in your gut. And if you're swallowing air, you have that as well. And your digestive system is is the outside. So if you were to take a rock by a long string and swallow it and then wait for it to come out on the other end, it's still going to be connected to the string come out of your mouth. It's going to be the string coming out of your mouth. So basically what I'm saying is that your digestive system is going to be a tube that has two openings, and bacteria and viruses and spores and air from the outside world can enter there, and it's going to continue from your mouth down to your anus, and that's the reason you have exocrine glands in that area. So that's the difference between the exocrine gland and endocrine gland, and again there's a spelling issue here. So endocrine glands are the chemicals being secreted, and these chemicals are called hormones. And the hormones are defined as chemical messengers secreted by endocrine glands. It is circulate in the bloodstream. They act on specific cells, the target cells in the body. They cannot act on every cell. They have the appropriate hormone receptor. The target cells, they have the appropriate hormone receptor, and that's the cell they're going to act on. They cannot, this is not a target cell. There are no receptors, therefore it cannot act on this cell. These cells, they have receptors, so they can act on these cells. So that's the hormone. So for example, if you got insulin, that's created the pancreas that the pancreas that insulin will go to in your blood, and the blood is going everywhere. It's going to your eyeballs, your fingertips, your stomach, but nothing happens there unless there's a target cell. So if you don't have a receptor for that hormone, in this case we're talking about insulin, it's not going to respond. So the only place that will respond to it is the target cell, and that's in your liver. So that's the only thing that's going to respond to the insulin. So here's an example of your gland. So whatever gland you're talking about is going to secrete a hormone, and then hormone goes through every cell in your body. Um, so it's going to go to your bloodstream, distribute throughout the entire body. It goes through the entire body. However, not every cell has a receptor for it. And then if it goes to the target cell has receptors for it. And then it goes to a non-target cell, there's no receptor there, then nothing's going to happen. So we have to have all of these things in place. We're going to talk about two types of diabetes in, end of the lecture. And both the nervous system and the endocrine system are going to be they're going to be communicating with each other. So however the endocrine system generally tends to be, so it's slower compared to the nervous system. So endocrine system is generally slower compared to the nervous system. So I wrote that there. And then endocrine nervous system, they work together. So we learned that in the nervous system, we have axons, and the action potential travels down the axon anywhere from 100 to 300 meters per second. That's pretty quick. And that's pretty quick for the nervous system. But in the endocrine system, the hormones, they have to get into your bloodstream. Then you need to wait for it. Sometimes it might take minutes or maybe hours for that hormone to actually take effect. And some of the things that are affected by these hormones could be puberty. And puberty can take months in order for it to take effect. On the other hand, the other type of hormone that's faster would be adrenaline. So if somebody's were to sneak up on you, maybe screaming in your car, you're going to have adrenaline and epinephrine fill your body in a split second. So not every hormone is going to be slow, but for the most part, most hormones are pretty slow. If you're going to eat your food, you might want to eat food a little bit slower. All dietitians will tell you, not to scarf down your food very quickly. Don't eat it too fast. If you eat it too fast, guess what? Your receptors in your stomach, they don't have time to take the information and tell you that you're full. So on top of that, you don't have the hormones in your system that tells your body it's getting full. So you slow down when you're eating. So if you eat that sandwich or hamburger really quickly, you're still going to be hungry because maybe you ate that very quickly and your hormones didn't have time to tell your body or your that you're full already. So if you want to eat a second sandwich and third sandwich, by the time you eat the third one, your hormones are going to be catching up. There's a lag time. So that at that point you have overeaten. So if that means you're gonna gain weight. So I think it's Okinawa in Japan. That's the place in the world where average lifespan is the highest. So the average lifespan of the people living there is the highest. If you ask them what their secret for living so long is, they are going to say, "Oh, we don't overeat." They eat. They say we eat our meal until we feel like we are 75% full. When we feel like we're 75% full, we stop eating. That's the reason. And the reason why, because you stop eating eventually, your hormone is going to catch up, and then probably in 15, 20 minutes, then you're going to feel full. So basically eat until you're 75% full, and then technically you're full. Your hormones are just slow. They haven't caught up to tell you yet that you are full already. So another trick is to drink a big glass of water before you eat. That's going to stretch your stomach and again trick you into thinking that you're partially full when you're actually not. Here is a little diagram and flow chart, basically just summarizing what I just said. You need a gland, whatever the gland is. It could be pancreas, it could be thyroid gland, it could be thymus gland, it could be pituitary gland. It secretes a chemical called hormone. And those hormones could be steroids, but they might not be. So they can be any hormone. They can be oxytocin, any type of hormone, and they're going to travel to the target cell. And they travel everywhere in the body through the circulatory system and lymphatic system. But if it finally hits the target cell, then if the target cell has receptors, it causes the target cells to do something. So it's going to cause the target cell to respond. Whatever the response is going to be, it's going to, let's say we're talking about the pancreas and that's secreting insulin. And so the response is going to be, it's going to lower your blood sugar. So it's going to cause the stomach and other kinds of chemicals, and it's going to basically work on that hormone. So if we are talking about insulin being released, it's going to take care of the blood sugar in your blood, and it's going to go to the liver, and there's a target cell there that's going to respond to it. Most of the hormones in the endocrine system works using a negative feedback loop. So you probably even seen it before in general biology. Maybe we talked about this a little bit in first lecture when we talked about homeostasis. So the way you describe this is by using negative feedback loop. So let me do this again for you one more time. So endocrine gland, it has a control center. Hormone is the pathway between the control center and the effectors, which are the target tissues. So think of this as like a seesaw. And basically your homeostasis is when this seesaw is uh, flat or straight line. And seesaw will go up and down. Just based on, let's say, how full you are. We're talking about insulin here. So this is the controller, and insulin is being released, going to the liver, and the seesaw is changing. So let's say if you go and eat a meal, the blood sugar goes up. Now your seesaw is up, and so it's going to go up, and now it's going to cause this to release insulin. And then once the seesaw goes, really causes this to release insulin, insulin goes out and takes care of the blood sugar, and it's going to go to the liver, and that's gonna basically stop this organ to release the insulin because it's gonna change how the seesaw is. So you don't want your blood sugar level to stay up all the time. You don't want your seesaw to stay up. So how do we get the seesaw to go down? So the way we do it by negative feedback loop, uh, if the seesaw is high, that means your blood sugar is high. That's going to activate the sensors in your pancreas to release insulin. And once you release insulin, that's going to travel everywhere in the body, but your liver is going to respond to it because it has receptors for it. And the liver has target cells. So the liver gets the access to the insulin, and it's going to suck up all the blood sugar in your blood like a sponge. So the blood sugar goes down. Now you're seeing that's going to go down because the blood sugar is being lowered by or absorbed by the liver. And that's why it's called a negative feedback loop, because they're producing hormone here. You're producing a hormone called insulin, and the insulin is going to go to the liver. When it goes to the liver, it causes seesaw to go down, and more insulin is being produced further. It gets pushed. So it's gonna go even down if there's more insulin being produced. So the whole purpose is to lower the blood sugar. Once the blood sugar gets lowered, reduce the seesaw evens out and it stops. So even if you happen to be a type 1 diabetic, you need to inject yourself with the insulin. Sometimes you can inject yourself with too much insulin, and then the seesaw goes too low and you're going to be hypoglycemic. So we have this term hyper and hypo. So hyperglycemic, it means that you have too much blood sugar. And then we also have another term, hypoglycemic. It means that your blood sugar is too low. So somebody who is going to be diabetic, they're diabetic because their blood sugar level is too high. And if they inject themselves with too much insulin and or they don't eat, then they end up being hypoglycemic. So you can achieve this state by not eating. And if you don't eat, your blood sugar is too low and you're hypoglycemic and you're hungry, and that comes from a hormone being released by the adipose tissue. So you can achieve that state if you're injecting yourself with insulin. If you inject yourself with too much insulin, and the CSI is going to drop, and because it's being absorbed by the liver, you go into hypoglycemic state, basically a shock. You might even faint if your blood sugar level is too low. So that's a negative feedback loop. That's how thermostat works in your house, the temperature controller on the wall. So thermostat works like this. You have a sensor, and if the air is too high, then the sensor will tell the air conditioning to stop blowing. If the temperature is too high, it's gonna tell the air conditioning to start blowing cold air. Cold air is going to reduce the room temperature, and the sensor would reset. It stops the cold air, and it stops the sensor to stop. So that's why it's called a negative feedback. This is also how your toilet works, by the way. So your toilet has this little balloon on top, and when the water fills, um, and it's a floater, so it's the floater will move up and it'll turn off the sensor. So that's how it works. On a side note, there's also a positive feedback loop, and that happens during childbirth. So during childbirth, let me see if I can pull it up for you. So during positive feedback loop, an example is oxytocin during childbirth. That's the most common type of positive feedback as an example. So it's probably easiest way to describe it. So during childbirth, when a woman is about to give birth, what happens is body releases a chemical that causes contractions, and the chemical is oxytocin. So it's going to make more and more chemical, and it's going to cause more and more contractions. And over time, the contractions, as the labor progresses, the contractions, they get stronger and stronger and stronger, and they also get shorter and shorter and shorter. So that's the positive feedback. So once the baby comes out, this whole thing kind of falls apart. So it's gonna get stronger and stronger and stronger and shorter and shorter and shorter, the contractions, until the baby's born. So that's how that positive feedback loop works. So this is just showing the hypothalamus is making the chemicals, and it's going to the anterior pituitary, which is secreting the chemical, and that's going to go to the thyroid gland. Okay, so we had this chart here where we had the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. So we're gonna work our way down on this chart, and we're gonna talk about some of these hormones next. Okay, so let's work our way down on the list. So some of these glands we're gonna go and focus on, and then we're gonna work our way down. First, we're going to do hypothalamus and then pituitary gland, and then we'll work on some of the other glands. So what kind of hormones do you produce in the thalamus? So brain, when you dissect that brain, you know where the thalamus is, and below the thalamus is the hypothalamus. Hypothalamus is going to be the main control center of the brain. It tries to keep the homeostasis of the body. So it's the main controller for the basic functions in your body. So things like your body temperature, respiratory rate, all kinds of things. But we learned that hypothalamus is also part of the limbic system. The limbic system is responsible for memory and emotions. So what part of hypothalamus is responsible for? It's going to be the part that produces hormones. So you have two hormones that are produced. And on top of that, this hypothalamus will also control partially the gland that's below, which is hypothalamus, uh, below the hypothalamus, and that's called the pituitary gland. So it's also known as hypophyseal gland. So links to nervous system and endocrine system, produces two hormones of its own, and monitors and controls the hormone secretions of pituitary gland. I want you to notice it says hormone secretions. So pituitary gland secretes hormones. It doesn't make them, but it secretes them. The third function of the main function is it's responsible for a lot of the background stuff that's happening in your body. So the pituitary gland is underneath the hypothalamus, and it's technically called the master gland. And the reason why it's called the master gland is because look at all these organs. These it controls it's parts it controls part of your reproductive system, your metabolism, color of your skin, and bones and muscles and a urinary system. So it controls a lot of things. So it can make, your urine more concentrated, or less concentrated. That's why it's called the master gland. It controls a lot of other organs. So even though hypothalamus is actually controls the pituitary gland, to a certain point, and this is going to create at least 8 different kinds of hormones that we're going to talk about. And some of these glands are broken into 2 parts. So you have 2 lobes, posterior and anterior. It's going to secrete 8 different hormones. It's going to have 2 lobes, which are posterior and anterior lobe. And each of these has a different function. So this is what it looks like. So this is the sphenoid bone. This is the sphenoid bone, and it's one of the bony markings that you had to memorize, and it was called the sella turcica. So sella turcica is also known as hypophyseal fossa, and this is where the pituitary gland is going to reside. So it's almost like a little cockpit on a fighter jet or maybe in a racing car, and the driver or the pilot is going to sit inside the cockpit. So the bony marking is where the pituitary gland is going to be. So hypothalamus again is going to be right above it. That's the hypothalamus. So it's going to be connected, and the name of the stalk that's connecting it is called the infundibulum. And that's something, the definition of that is something that connects to something. So we're going to see this term again when we talk about the female reproductive system, because the ovaries are connected to the uterus using a fallopian tube, and part of the fallopian tube is called infundibulum. So the infundibulum is also called the pituitary stalk. So it's also known as pituitary stalk. So that's the same thing. So if the anterior, so there's the anterior part, and there is anterior lobe, and there is posterior lobe. So there are 2 lobes. And the first one, the anterior lobe, is also known as adenohypophysis. The word adeno, first I'm going to say hypophysis, means pituitary gland. And the word adeno stands for secreting. It means to secrete. So hypophysis, hopefully you remember, it's an old term for pituitary gland. And this part is called adeno, and adeno means to secrete. So it's going to be controlled by hypothalamus. So the adenohypophysis is controlled by the hypothalamus. That's going to be secreting chemicals, and hypothalamus will secrete these chemicals that will come down from, sorry, the pituitary gland will secrete the chemicals that will come down here from the hypothalamus. So the adenohypophysis is called adeno because it's controlled by the secretions on the other hand. So the posterior gland, posterior lobe here, it's not controlled by the secretions. It's called the neurohypophysis, and the word neuro stands for the nervous system. So it's going to stand for the nerve cells in this case, and it's called neurohypophysis because it's not shown here, but the later image will show you that hypothalamus, you have these, in the hypothalamus, you have these neuroendocrine cells. They're going to come down, and they're going to tell the posterior pituitary gland what to do. So it's going to be neuroendocrine cell that will control this part. So I'm just going to write that down for you. So neuro means nerve cells, and they're going to be neuroendocrine cells that come down from the hypothalamus and connect here, and then they control the posterior lobe. So if I were to draw 'em, basically there are these cells that are coming down and then connections that are coming down. And in this case, this is receiving some chemicals. So the blue dots would represent chemicals that are coming down or the hormones. Okay. So there are two parts, anterior and posterior. So first, let's talk about the posterior pituitary. So posterior pituitary, it's going to show here that this is connected to the hypothalamus. That's the hypothalamus. And it's going to have these neuroendocrine cells, so neurosecretory cells that are connected here. And that's what you're seeing. They're coming down, and it's on the opposite side. So before the pituitary gland was on the right side, or the posterior pituitary was on the right side. Now posterior pituitary is on the left side. So I'm talking about this picture here because it's showing the other side now. So don't let that throw you off. So you see that it's connected to the hypothalamus using the neuroendocrine cells, and how the hypothalamus talks to, that's how the hypothalamus talks to the posterior pituitary, and that's why it's called neurohypophysis. So the hypothalamus itself produces two hormones, and those two hormones are those are made in the hypothalamus, and those two hormones are oxytocin and ADH. They are made in hypothalamus, and then they migrate down. So they're made here in the hypothalamus, and then they come down here in the posterior pituitary, and they are being secreted by the posterior pituitary gland. So once your body needs those hormones, your posterior pituitary gland is going to release the ADH and oxytocin. So on the exam, if I were to ask you which gland produces ADH and oxytocin, you're going to say hypothalamus. That's what creates those hormones. If I were to ask you which gland secretes those hormones, you're going to say, so if I ask you which gland secretes the ADH and oxytocin, you're going to say posterior pituitary gland. Now, no matter how many times I say this, or how many times I repeat this, but sometimes, maybe 1/4 of my students don't pay attention. And then when I ask the question, which gland produces ADH and oxytocin, or if I ask the other way around, which gland secretes ADH and oxytocin, those 1/4 of my students will say hypothalamus. So posterior pituitary gland is what secretes it. Hypothalamus is what makes it or produces it. Posterior pituitary gland does not produce it. It just secretes it. So it's connected to the hypothalamus by endocrine. ADH and oxytocin is made in the hypothalamus, are transported down axons, and the posterior pituitary gland is for storage and release. So we'll focus on the later lecture on these ones, but right now we're going to focus on this. So what does ADH stand for? It stands for antidiuretic hormone. So antidiuretic hormone, so ADH and oxytocin, most of these hormones that we're going to talk about today, you're going to see they're abbreviated. So antidiuretic hormone stands for ADH, or ADH stands for antidiuretic hormone. So maybe you already know what this means, what the word diuretic means, to increase urination. So that's what that means. So what is so if you eat or drink something that's diuretic, it's going to go and make you pee more. And things like caffeine and alcohol, those are diuretics. So if you ingest those materials, that's going to make you urinate more. So antidiuretic means the opposite of peeing. So antidiuretic is going to conserve your urine, which means that your body releases ADH. It's going to go to your kidneys. It's going to retain water. It's going to say, reduce your urine. So the way that's going to do is going to reabsorb water. So once you reabsorb water from the urine, it's going to look more concentrated. It's going to be more darker or orange or yellow in coloration. So it's going to be regulating water conservation. So it's also to help you regulate water balance in your body. Once you have imbalance, then this will cause you to pee more. So, and if you need more water, then it's gonna basically consider water. So that's what's happening in these tubes. So you have these things called collecting ducts. When ADH is secreted, it's going to go into your blood and it's going to go into your collecting duct, and it will cause the collecting duct to become more permeable. And it's more permeable, the water will then be absorbed from the urine, and the urine will get more concentrated. The water will go into your back into your bloodstream, and it'll regulate your water balance. So your circulatory system, that's the big picture. In terms of ADH, it's produced in the hypothalamus and stored in the posterior pituitary. And the posterior pituitary, don't get it confused with the hypothalamus or the anterior pituitary. So those are two different things with two different functions. So ADH conserves water in the kidneys and regulates water balance in the body. In this lecture, I'm going to be talking about diabetes. So that's going to be 4 kinds of diabetes I'm going to be talking about. You got 2 common ones. Those are diabetes mellitus. So those are blood sugar diabetes. You have type 1 diabetes and type 2 diabetes. So that's taking care of 2. So I said 4, the other 2. So the third one is going to be called diabetes insipidus. So this one. So that's one type of diabetes, and that has nothing to do with the blood sugar. And the fourth one is going to be called gestational diabetes. That's blood sugar one, and then it has to do with something similar as type 2 diabetes. So we're going to be talking about that as well. So what is diabetes insipidus? So let's say you have cancer in your brain and your brain is not making enough ADH. And your brain is not making enough ADH, and there is your pituitary gland is secreting too little, and your hyposecretion, hypo means less, so you're not secreting enough ADH. Now your brain has something going on, it's not making enough ADH, and if ADH helps you conserve water, and if you don't have ADH, that's going to cause you to pee a lot. So you're going to be peeing a lot, and that'll be a symptom of diabetes. If you have blood sugar diabetes, that also causes you to pee a lot. So the word diabetes doesn't mean sugar. The word diabetes means urination. So I think it's Greek. Let's break it down. So diabetes refers to flow, means urination. So if you have diabetes, one of the 4 kinds of diabetes, you're going to have excess urination. So diabetes insipidus, what does insipidus mean? We said earlier that diabetes mellitus is blood sugar type of diabetes. So your diabetes, you have blood sugar, and if you have type 1 or 2, then you have sugar in your urine, and your urine is going to be sweet. So over here, we're not talking about blood sugar. So we're talking about ADH. So if you smell urine or taste urine as they used to do before, and there's no sweet flavor to it, that's insipidus, means it's referring to lack of sugar. So the word insipidus means lack of sugar. So that means lack of sugar again. So we have 4 types of diabetes, type 1 and 2. There is sugar in those 2, and there's no sugar in this one. And then gestational diabetes, also high sugar in the urine. So in this case, you have no sugar in the urine, but you urinate, not due to the fact that you don't have enough, but that's due to the fact that you don't have enough ADH. So, sometimes that can happen. Okay, so pituitary gland is going to be responsible for this. So there's a little graphic here that's kind of telling you that. Let me see. So it causes excess urination, dehydration, and thirst. So it doesn't make enough ADH which is responsible for generating your urine. It causes the kidneys to conserve water, or if it's making maybe too much ADH. So you're peeing all the time, and that'd be a symptom of diabetes. But we wouldn't know which kind until you have to go to the doctor and test your blood sugar. And if you're starting to get like headaches, you're peeing a lot, you're always thirsty, you're gonna go to urgent care ER. They're gonna go and do the diabetes mellitus test, which is blood sugar diabetes. If you don't have that, then they'll go down the list of diagnosis and one of try to identify if you had diabetes insipidus. And for that one, they might need to go ahead and do a blood test to see. Okay. So diabetes insipidus is hypo, means less secretion of ADH, which results in ability to conserve water appropriately. So we're still talking about hormones, and we're talking about the posterior pituitary and hypothalamus producing ADH and oxytocin. Oxytocin goes to the posterior pituitary where it gets stored and it gets released. And oxytocin has multiple effects on your body. And one of them is it triggers the uterine contractions during labor. And when your body's ready, basically, and it's the right time, posterior pituitary will secrete oxytocin. It'll go into the uterus. It'll cause the muscle layer of the uterus to contract. And that's what causes progress. And it's going to go into the mammary glands as well. It's going to jumpstart the milk production and so forth. So oxytocin is also going to be there to help the mother bond with the baby. And it has many functions. So in fact, we've been able to actually generate a drug that stimulates oxytocin. So if a woman wants to plan the birth of their baby, for example, she wants to say, okay, I want my baby to be born on this day. She can schedule with her doctor, and they will arrive the day before, and then they'll go ahead and uh, do a drip of Pitocin, which is similar to oxytocin, and she gets hit with a drip of that chemical. The chemical will basically start stimulating uterine contractions, and the uterine contraction will start either in a couple hours or a day later, but eventually it's going to start contracting, and the positive feedback will start working, and it'll cause the contractions, and it'll release more and more and more oxytocin, and it's going to be stronger and stronger contractions, and small they're going to be longer, last longer, and they're going to be, close together. So it would just keep going until eventually the baby's born, and then the whole thing kind of falls apart. So oxytocin is produced in the hypothalamus, stored in the posterior pituitary gland, and released by the posterior pituitary gland. All right, so that was the posterior pituitary gland. Next part of the lecture is going to go over the anterior pituitary gland. So I'm going to stop this video here, and I'll see you in the next one.